Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney received his results from being tested a second time for COVID-19. The province's new temporary measures to combat the virus is having a major impact on the Lethbridge economy. We hear from concerned business owners. And the federal Liberals announced details of new rent relief for business owners across the country who are still struggling during the pandemic.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has tested negative for COVID-19 after potentially being exposed. Kenney announced yesterday that he was self-isolating and had been tested after learning a close contact contracted the virus. His office says he will continue to work from home until November 23rd, despite receiving the negative test. The Premier announced new restrictions in our province yesterday to help combat the COVID-19 virus. Alberta doctors have sent a second letter to Premier Kenney expressing their concern that more needs to be done to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus. Their group, calling itself Masks for Canada, calls the spread of COVID-19 uncontrollable and wants to see the closure of more businesses, and not just for 2 weeks. John Carpe is a lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. He says at this point, certain people may be guilty of unnecessary fear-mongering.
COVID deaths peaked in April and May, and they dropped sharply in June. They dropped further in July, August, September, October, November. The doctors are ignoring the fact that when the media are talking about all these cases, more than 97% of those cases are perfectly healthy people with no symptoms, some of them mildly ill. Only 3% of those cases are actually sick people that need to go into hospital. The doctors are not telling us that the hospital beds right now, only 3% of hospital beds in Alberta are being used by COVID patients.
Alberta now has 8,593 active COVID-19 cases, along with 512 here in the South Zone. There are 174 in Lethbridge. Fortunately, over 28,000 Albertans have also recovered from the virus. Some of the new restrictions from the province include a 2-week ban on indoor group sports and fitness classes. Those new measures are being felt in many cities across the province, including right here in Lethbridge.
We'll need to make adjustments accordingly to be able to give an open gym access to our members and provide them with the opportunity to maintain their fitness levels or increase them, obviously. And we know that the value of building a healthy immune system through fitness is not only good for the physical, but for the mental, especially during COVID and the times that we're enduring now. I can't imagine what the government's going through with. It must be a very difficult situation for them to have to make these decisions. And we just appreciate the opportunity to give some type of access to fitness and not just force close everybody.
To not be able to come here and do a workout, yet be able to go next door and spend the afternoon drinking at a pub, in a social environment just doesn't make sense to me. And so I think a lot of people are, seeing the inequity. We can all make the argument of what about my environment because it's so safe and that other one isn't, why is that allowed? And I think that's part of the problem right now is that we've got a situation where seemingly to the layperson and to the public, the exemptions and exceptions are being fairly haphazardly applied in ways that don't make sense to common people.
Along with gym facilities, organized sports have also been put on pause for a couple of weeks. Sports groups have been forced to cancel all practices and games. From hockey to soccer, Lethbridge coaches and players will have to be patient as public health officials make decisions that keep evolving.
I actually get the feeling that we'll go back to what they call phase 1 training, which is the stuff that places like BC were doing where their players are in boxed areas. I kind of get that feeling that's coming. That's nothing. I've heard nothing, but it's just a feeling I get. I actually think that'll then push us back a longer way before the cohort stuff has to resurface again.
This is a clear message to everybody. Like, we have to be smarter about our distancing, our contact with people, where we're getting it from, the socializing part of the game, the outside part of the game. We had to become smarter with what we were doing, and I think this gives us a chance to breathe and reflect, and where can we be smarter with what we're doing here and then educating the kids and the parents of what we have to get done here.
The City of Lethbridge announced that due to the province's new targeted health measures, all team sports at city arenas have been cancelled until November the 27th. Churches in our city are once again being forced to go back to 1/3 of their capacity due to the province's new restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. As Micah Quinn explains, this will not only impact our faith community, but also other organizations such as dance studios, which have been forced to close completely for 2 weeks.
Starbound Dance Center will be forced to shut its doors, and there is visible frustration coming from staff.
Because we do feel that fine arts and dance is really being targeted, because we are in individual sports such as gymnastics and everything else, but we are being forced to lock down. We have so many protocols and stuff in comparison to schools and everything else, so we're really struggling that we've gone above and beyond to cap our class sizes and put in all this stuff, and that we are being forced to shut down, especially when we've had no cases in our dance studio or any dance studios in Lethbridge.
The studio owner of the Starbound Dance Center, Sylvia Ng, says that they are trying to stay positive during this time.
And see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But for 2 weeks, we will be closed. We'll adhere to the guidelines. We'll be doing some more deep cleaning in here, like usual, but we were preparing for a winter show and everything, so everything's just been postponed.
The Mist Church has stayed at 1/3 capacity for their congregation, even before yesterday's announcement. The site pastor of the church, Joel Klemick, is preaching patience and a positive message.
And so in the meantime, while people are trying to cope, we're saying stay fixated on our hope. Our hope is not in a church service. It's not in our gathering sizes. We know Christmas is going to look different this year. We're getting ready for change. We don't know when things go back to normal, but we are confident that God's plan for us is not changing. This was mixed into it all along, and because of that, He's with us in it. He's going to walk us through it. This is the hope of Christmas, Emmanuel, God with us.
The restrictions will be lifted on November 27th. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
An initiative has been launched to help provide for the needy here in Lethbridge. The collaborative effort involves Amazing Grace Church, Connecting Our Communities Lethbridge, and the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. These groups want locals to know that help is available during these very difficult times.
We are asking our community to come together to drop off donations, a brand new winter gear, whether that's a snowsuit, brand new gloves, toques, whatever you have. If they are in excellent used condition, we will take those as well. We want to dress at least 50 children who are struggling right now, and this is as the impacts of COVID within our community.
For me, it's a no-brainer. I can't put my blinders on. We see the need, it's COVID, it's hard times, and that's what Jesus would do, right? You know, He would go out and provide that for people. So why wouldn't the church, which is the body of Christ, do the same thing?
Now imagine this. You are 16 years of age and eager to get your driver's license, but it's 2020 and there's a global pandemic and the roads in your town are full of snow, slush, and ice. Lethbridge Driving Academy says they're seeing a lot of their new students feeling extremely anxious.
Some of the students, of course, have managed to get a road test booked, and then a blizzard comes along and their lessons have been delayed. So there's that adds another layer. And then we've also got the students who are in the high schools that have been affected by COVID, and whether they test negative or not, they're in quarantine, and now we've had to postpone that again. But the winter driving, some students are going, I want to go no matter what, because I want to learn in winter. And some of them are just saying, no, it's too much. Safety first. We want to make sure that everyone's safe. And it's really difficult to parallel park and show them how to parallel park when your streets are filled with snow. You can't see the curb.
In Alberta, it takes a minimum of 3 years to get a full non-GDL Class 5 driver's license. The province announced some good news for a city which has seen high unemployment. Calgary will be picking up 770 new jobs with the upgrades to the Peter Lougheed Centre. The $137 million project will include 15 new beds, including 2 new trauma areas. The intake area to assess and treat patients will also be expanded from 6 to 26 spaces. Construction is expected to begin very soon with a completion date set for the spring of 2022. Manitoba has recorded 9 more deaths related to the COVID-19 pandemic for the second straight day yesterday, and today, 5 more deaths. The province also saw record high levels of hospitalizations and patients needing critical care. The numbers came in as new COVID-19 restrictions came into effect aimed at reducing the spread of the virus. Bars, museums, and theaters are closed, and recreational activities are suspended. Churches cannot hold in-person services, and non-essential stores and restaurants are limited to curbside pickup and delivery. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says his province is updating its color-coded system for imposing COVID-19 restrictions in light of alarming new projections.
If we don't change course in a big way, Ontario is on track for 6,500 new cases per day. And based on current projections, intensive care units could be overwhelmed in 6 weeks. The impact on our hospitals would be absolutely devastating. We're updating our COVID-19 framework with new thresholds. We see the numbers rapidly increasing. Dr. Williams has also updated his advice to everyone who lives in the red control zones. Limit your trips outside of the home except essential reasons, like going to work, school, getting groceries, keeping a medical appointment, or exercising.
Our country's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, says strict public health rules might help, but nothing's more important than following those rules, especially if people hope to have any sort of gatherings at Christmas.
If we don't cut down contacts by 25%, in some areas even more than that, then the growth will continue. So that's the sort of fundamental principles and concepts. The other concept that the Prime Minister also said is to act quickly and then be really careful when you are relaxing at the other end, because what will happen is that given winter is coming, people going indoors, you may see a rise again. So this yo-yoing and up and down is really very difficult for society and for individuals.
Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is pledging to fill the gap in the government's attempt to bolster hard-hit businesses with some much-needed rent relief.
This will provide rent and mortgage support through to June 2021 for businesses and other qualifying organizations that have lost revenue because of COVID-19. It would cover up to 65% of rent or mortgage interest payments for the hardest hit businesses. And crucially, this support would be payable directly to tenants.
In the United States, meanwhile, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the country's top infectious disease expert, said his country is in a difficult situation with COVID-19 after experiencing 10 million infections, but he's hopeful there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
It's quite problematic. I have said that publicly many times, not to scare people, but to bring a reality check to where we are. If you look at it, we have 10 million infections in the United States, almost 250,000 deaths. We've had 60,000 hospitalizations. And now, last count, we had 143,000 infections in a single day. When I testified before the Congress 4 months ago, I said if we did not get control of this, that we could reach 100,000 infections a day, and people thought I was being hyperbolic. And now look what's happening. That's the bad news. I think the encouraging news that people need to understand that public health measures, not lockdown of the country, but public health measures that are rather simple and easy to understand, the universal wearing of masks, the physical distancing, the avoiding congregate and crowded places, outdoors better than indoors, washing hands. It sounds simple in the context of this ominous outbreak, but in fact it can turn it around, and that's what we really need to do.
California is hitting an unwelcome coronavirus milestone of 1 million confirmed infections. The most populous state in the United States is the second place to pass the mark that Texas hit earlier this week.
But we've also had more than 18,000 deaths in California, which is the real statistic to pay attention to. We are an oasis of doing the right thing, and we are an oasis in terms of per capita counts. But the cases are no longer flat. The cases are rising, and they could, you reach a point and they can really rise rapidly. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And I think we have to really redouble our efforts to limit transmission, which means wearing masks, maintaining social distance, avoiding indoor crowds, and washing your hands.
Flash flood warnings continued across North Carolina this week. Water rescues, evacuations, and school cancellations were seen in many parts of the state as heavy rains brought massive flooding.
It looks like Lake Ontario, and this is very bad, and what people don't realize, I have an issue with this because there's a container that belongs to somebody, so I don't know what's in the container. It has floated from somewhere. You have a dumpster that's sitting over here to the far side that is floating. It's flooded. The street is out. The garden is down there. That's why I say the walkway flooded.
Mission Aviation Fellowship is an organization which has been around for 75 years, reaching the world through the air for Christ. The ministry CEO, Brad Bell, recently shared an example with Bridge City News of how they're helping to save lives through their ministry.
We stopped in a village and we picked up a group of men from a U.S. church, and they had been at a remote hospital installing a solar panel system, a high-powered solar panel system. And the weeks prior, we had delivered the team, we'd flown them out, we'd flown out their solar panels, and so there's a lot of kerfluffle and we're getting ready to leave, and the head nurse from the hospital comes out and she says, she introduced herself and she said to me, we have a lot of power failures out here, and what these men have done means that I won't have to hold a baby dying in my arms because the power's failed and the oxygen pumps failed, and the baby can no longer survive.
Catch the full interview with Brad Bell from Mission Aviation Fellowship coming up later in our program. Well, our temperature went above zero again today and the snow stopped, but there is a chance of more of the white stuff in the forecast for this weekend. Just in time, right? Full weather details are coming right up. We are seeing a bit of a meltdown as the mercury continues to climb. That means more of a slushy commute. Jeanette Roche is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, this weekend may be a good time to finally stock up on some more windshield washer fluid?
Yeah, well, it certainly is the time of year you should be with all the rising and falling temperatures and all the snow melt and snowfall. And speaking of snowfall, we could see a 60% chance of flurries developing late this evening and overnight. That could last into Saturday morning, clearing around noon though, high of 2 degrees on Saturday. Into Sunday though, we're going to see the sunshine, 0 degrees. Same thing for Monday, 0 and sunshine, mix of sun and cloud on Tuesday as those temperatures climb to 8 degrees. Wednesday and Thursday, we're looking at partly cloudy skies as well, 3 degrees on Wednesday and dipping down to -1 for next Thursday. So the almanac tells us this time of year we should be looking at average high temperatures of around 5 degrees, average lows of -7. On back in 1999 or 1990 rather, it was a high of 20 degrees. That was our record high for this day. Our record low was a chilly -34 back in 1955. 7:41 was when the sun rose this morning, and our sun set this evening just before 5 p.m. at 4:51 p.m. So unfortunately, that 4 o'clock hour is where the sun is setting. Okay, so looking at the west coast, we're seeing some showers into tomorrow for both Victoria and Vancouver. 10 degrees the high in Victoria, 8 for Vancouver, -1 in Edmonton, 0 in Calgary. Following an overnight snowfall, they could see that developing overnight and then clearing around noon. The Saskatoon, -5 with a 60% chance of flurries. Flurries also expected tomorrow in Regina with a high of -2, 3 degrees over in Winnipeg under partly cloudy skies. As we move further east across the country, Toronto will see a high of 7 degrees, high of 6 in Montreal with partly cloudy skies. Now Ottawa could see a chance of flurries tomorrow with a 4 degrees being the high. As we look further east into the Maritimes, we're going to see a lot of precipitation over here. Chance of flurries and rainfall over in Fredericton, high of 5 degrees, 7-degree high in Halifax with a 60% chance of showers. Chance of showers also expected in Charlottetown, high of 7 degrees. Mix of rain and snow also expected for St. John's. Could see 5 millimeters of rain and up to 2 to 4 centimeters of snow. So there you go, that is your forecast.
Temporary COVID-19 shutdowns pushed sales at Canada's largest movie chain down by more than 85% during the peak summer period. Cineplex is reporting a third quarter loss of just over $121 million. Now that compares to a profit of $13.4 million last year. Revenue plunged from $418.4 million to just $61 million during the July to September period last year. Cineplex says it will try to deal with the impact of the pandemic by taking a more prudent approach to ventures, including new private cinema rentals and reductions to expenditures. TELUS is launching a new agriculture technology division. The company says it wants to transform the global food system. Company officials say the new initiative called TELUS Agriculture can improve decision-making by food producers and consumers. It will offer expertise in communications, data collection, and artificial intelligence. It already works with more than 1,200 experts, including those in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. TELUS Agriculture will also add Florida-based AFT Technologies and California-based Agrian and its holdings. They're the latest in a series of acquisitions made by TELUS over the past year, which were mostly in Canada and the United States. Minnesota has granted key permits for Enbridge's Line 3 crude oil pipeline project. Company officials say the construction on the long-delayed $2.6 billion project could begin very soon. The approvals by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the Department of Natural Resources clears the way for engineers to issue the remaining federal permits for Calgary-based Enbridge. Environmental and some Indigenous groups have been fighting the project for many years. They contend the initiative will threaten the water supply where Indigenous people harvest wild rice and that the Canadian oil sands it would carry would aggravate climate change. Microsoft says Canada was one of the targets in recent attempts by hackers to steal valuable data from pharmaceutical companies and vaccine researchers. It says the attempts, which came from state-backed Russian and North Korean hackers, were mostly unsuccessful. Microsoft says other targets were in the United States, France, South Korea, and India, where many coronavirus vaccine developers are doing their clinical trials. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 93 points in the day to finish at 16,675. The Dow was up 399 points to finish at 29,080. The S&P 500 was up 48 points to 3585, and the Nasdaq was up 119 points to 11,829. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 98 cents to $40.14 US per barrel. Natural gas was even on the day at $2.97 US. Gold was up $12.38 to $18.8920 US an ounce, and silver was up 39 cents to $24.67 US an ounce. Wheat is at $265 per metric ton. Barley's also at $265. Canola's at $5.60, and corn is at $276 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $2.05 to $109.93. Feeder cattle were also down on the day, $2.85 to $137.88. Lean hogs were down 90 cents to $64.90. The Canadian dollar was up over the past 24 hours to 76.16 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, many groups are having a tough time with the province's new COVID-19 restrictions that are now in place for the next 2 weeks. Those include churches going back to 1/3 capacity for attendance, no indoor group fitness classes or team sport activities, and restaurants and pubs are being forced to close by 11 p.m. The restrictions are only temporary until November the 27th. Alberta now has over 8,300 active cases of COVID-19. There's a Christian organization that has been flying in the air and saving lives in remote areas of the world for 75 years. Coming up, my interview with Brad Bill, the CEO of Mission Aviation Fellowship, who will have more. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Lethbridge's Sport Council's Outdoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Mondays from 9:30 to 11 a.m. at the Service Sports Center and from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. This free program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy a great time of fun and get active. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/rovinggyms. The Ho Ho Holiday 5K is the most festive fun run in Canada, combining the magic of the holiday season with community engagement and fitness. This fun run helps raise funds to support Make-A-Wish Canada. Each registration includes a Santa suit, finisher's medal, a holiday treat, and timing app. Beginning November 25th until December 31st, you can join thousands of Santas virtually across Canada, spreading Christmas cheer and helping support Make-A-Wish Canada. For more information, visit hohoholiday5k.com. Get out and explore nature. The Helen Schuler Nature Center is offering guided 1-hour field trips for all ages. Visit lethbridge.ca/things to do. Click on Nature Center and follow the events page. where you'll find a list of featured tours that will introduce you to amazing plants and animals found right here in Lethbridge. Cost is $35. Book online for your tour today. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
There is a nonprofit group which has been delivering hope to many around the world for a very long time. It is Mission Aviation Fellowship, a Christian organization that uses airplanes to bring the love of God in tangible ways to thousands of isolated communities around the globe. Joining me now is the CEO of Mission Aviation Fellowship, Brad Bell, joining me from Guelph, Ontario. Welcome to Bridge City News, Brad.
Thank you, Hal. Good to see you again.
You too. Now, how would you best explain what Mission Aviation Fellowship is all about in a more specific way?
Yeah, so you mentioned our mission statement, sharing God's love through aviation and technology. We're in about 30 countries, and we use our aircraft to deliver medical and food aid. And those same aircraft also transport local pastors and evangelists and doctors. So the work is quite varied between each country, but that's typically what we do. One of the main things I think that makes us different from some other agencies is that our mission staff live in the countries with the people that they serve. So they're almost all overseas.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how do you work with some of the volatile areas, especially when some governments may be corrupt, trying to get into those countries. But if you have boots on the ground and locals that you work with, it makes it a little bit easier, I guess, does it? To try and reach the most vulnerable.
It helps, and we've been in the countries typically for decades or many, many decades, and so we've been able to build trust with local officials and government officials, and they understand that we are there to help, and that really helps a lot.
So how and when did your group actually get started with Mission Aviation Fellowship?
So we're pretty old, older than me. This is our 75th anniversary. We started just after World War II, and there was a number of pilots that were really passionate about flying, and they had just served in the war, and they wanted to use airplanes for good. They wanted to use airplanes for God's glory. And so they started simultaneously actually in England and the United States, and that grew and grew to us now being, as I mentioned, in over 30 countries. So the elevator pitch that I use is that one of our aircraft is taking off or landing every 4 minutes. So it's pretty busy. Yeah.
Wow. Now you mentioned just after the Second World War. Where was the actual first flight and who flew it?
So we're kind of proud of that. The first flight was flown by a woman, Betty Green, a young lady at the time, and she flew some Wycliffe Bible translators into a remote camp in Mexico. And I mean, we're just proud of that because it's a neat part of our heritage that a woman was the first flight. And Betty served as a WASP, so she was actually in the U.S. Air Force helping to ferry aircraft into the war zones.
I was reading on your website, Brad, that Mission Aviation Fellowship has made over 52,000 flights, carried around 150,000 passengers, hauled over 5 million kilograms of cargo, and covered 7.2 million kilometers. Who specifically does Mission Aviation Fellowship serve?
Wow, so that's a big question. We fly staff and missionaries for Wycliffe and Samaritan's Purse, Red Cross, World Vision, and about 1,500 other partners. And in many countries, we fly pastors and evangelists from the local church to visit the remote congregations. But we also do medical work in those countries. So in Angola, for example, we do something called a medical safari. And we'll take a plane and a pilot and a team of doctors and nurses, and we'll go out for a week. And we'll stop in remote villages, and the doctors will set up clinics, and they'll do surgeries in just some incredibly remote places. And then the whole group will stay overnight, and they'll get up the next morning and they'll fly on to the next village.
Now, you mentioned Samaritan's Purse. One of the stories we recently had on Bridge City News was how they've set up field hospitals in the Bahamas, helping, with the second wave of COVID-19. So are you doing that as well, flying in some of their doctors and some of their nurses too, to help those most vulnerable?
Yeah, generally not. I mean, Samaritan's Purse has significantly less aircraft, but they have some big aircraft where they can fly in these mobile hospitals. No, the work that we would do with them would be over in Africa, where we're flying smaller teams and smaller aircraft into more remote locations.
So Brad, can you share a specific story or two of the difference that Mission Aviation Fellowship flight has made to those you serve?
Yeah, so a couple stories. our impact in different countries is unique. We operate differently in each country. So Nepal, for example, you'll recall a few years ago there was a bad earthquake, and our emergency response team arrived in country just a few days after. We set up an office, opened that up, and we had partners literally lined up out the door, down the stairs, and around the block, and so we were able to work with some amazing organizations to fly in food and building supplies and doctors and engineers to help reconstruct a lot of the villages that have been destroyed. I was in South Sudan about a year ago, actually about a year ago this time, and I was out on a long flight, about an 8-hour flight with one of the Canadian pilots, and we stopped in a number of villages and we had to refuel, and we were also dropping and picking up people. And one of the teams that we picked up, we stopped in a village and we picked up a group of men from a U.S. church, and they had been at a remote hospital installing a solar panel system, a high-powered solar panel system. And the weeks prior, we had delivered the team. We'd flown them out. We'd flown out their solar panels. So there's a lot of kerfluffle, and we're getting ready to leave. And the head nurse from the hospital comes out, and she introduced herself, and she said to me, we have a lot of power failures out here. And what these men have done means that I won't have to hold a baby dying in my arms because the power's failed and the oxygen pumps failed. And the baby can no longer survive. And wow, that really hit me. And so, that's some of the impact, along with our partners, that we're able to have in many places in the world.
That definitely touches a lot of people's hearts. Tell me about some of the other rewards you get out of heading up Mission Aviation Fellowship Canada.
Me personally, or the organization?
No, you personally, as the CEO. Talk to me about it.
Wow. Well, I used to be. I started my own technology company at a university, so I did entrepreneurial tech for 26 years. And I was just in an interview earlier today talking about how meaningful this work is, how important it is to be able to have this impact on people's lives, to be able to share the gospel. It has just been incredibly rewarding. And most days I am just honored and humbled and proud to be able to be part of this organization. And because the organization is 75 years old, there's a real sense that I'm really just the current caretaker, that this organization has had a tremendous legacy. And so it's just a privilege to be part of that.
That's a wonderful, wonderful attitude to have. Brad, what about some of the major challenges that you have with MAF?
Well, like any other organization, there's lots of complexity to deal with and fundraising and that kind of thing. COVID has been tough. I know it's been hard on everybody. Our field staff, back in March when COVID hit, we didn't really know what that was going to look like. Nobody knew. And our field staff, along with our leadership, made the decision that our staff would stay in the field because they wanted to serve the people that they lived with in case there was a need, in case they were able. And so COVID's been difficult. Some countries, they don't allow us to fly at all. Other countries allow us to fly, but only medical. Some countries we can fly as normal. And so COVID has just brought a myriad of challenges. Some of our staff needed to return home because they have family members that are sick, parents that are aging, and that's been a challenge. And so we've spent a lot of time and energy just coping through that, and God has blessed us through all that. But like other organizations, and I want to be careful, I know this has impacted everybody, so I don't want to make it sound like we're hard done by. We're not. We've been blessed, but it certainly has been a challenge.
So Brad, let me ask you something. Where do you receive a lot of your funding?
So, we're kind of unique. About 97% of our funding comes from private individuals. For a charity our size, that's really weird. Typically, a charity our size would be getting a significant portion of their funding from government or from foundations. And we are just incredibly blessed with a really dedicated group of supporters that have funded us for years and years. So it's a real privilege to be able to represent those donors when we go out and do all that work.
Now, you talk about flying into some of these remote areas, and I'm thinking maybe some of different countries around the world where there might be some of that instability. Do you ever fear for your safety as you're flying into a lot of these regions?
Well, when the CEO goes to visit one of the programs, which I'm privileged to be able to do a couple times a year, I never feel unsafe because I'm with staff that have lived in the country, that know the locals. I want to be careful that I don't sound smug about that, because I know there is danger in some of the countries, but I do feel quite well protected. But clearly our staff at some points are in danger, and it's by the grace of God that they're kept safe. And it varies from region to region. We're in a lot of different parts in the world. I think of one country last year where we had to make the difficult call of evacuating all of our staff during the summer because there was danger. So it does vary, but we also operate, or we try and operate in a very safe mode, and we're constantly assessing what we think the risk level is in order to keep our families safe. Because it's not just our pilots and our engineers that are there, our families live there.
So how are Jesus and God brought up in a conversation when you're helping those who are most vulnerable in these different regions? How do you bring up the love of Christ in these conversations as you're helping people?
Well, that looks different in every place that we're serving. Sometimes if we're flying an evangelist or a pastor into a remote village to do a tent meeting, it's pretty clear why we're there, and we're sharing with staff about our Christian life and our Christian values. In other places, it's simply that we're there. It's simply that we're there to do a medevac, to bring a sick patient back. And a lot of what we do, I often say this, it's the work that our pilots and engineers and that they do is amazing, but the work that our spouses do is in some cases almost more. So that they're helping do a homeschool, or they're teaching at a school, or they have a group of people over at their home and every week, and they're just visiting, and they're just living life with these people. And I was in Uganda last year. One of the wives has a street ministry for street kids. And every week she goes and she works with 50 to 100 street kids, and they do reading, and they do singing, and they feed them, and just doing life and just sharing God's love. So, it just looks different everywhere we are.
And I can imagine learning about all the different cultures and foods and languages. That's also quite rewarding as well. How many aircraft do you have? I'm just curious.
About 130. Wow. Yeah, so, one of the other taglines is we have the world's largest fleet of small aircraft. A lot of those are Caravans and Kodiaks, which would be 10 or 12-seater aircraft. So substantial, well, I like to call them large little aircraft. So substantial aircraft that can carry a lot. And then, of course, we have some smaller 4-seaters and that kind of thing as well.
How is Mission Aviation Fellowship planning for the future to ensure that your group remains effective and has a big impact in countries around the globe?
That's a big question. So, I'll touch on one area. So one of the areas that we've started to look at in the last 5 years is something called disruptive technology. And disruptive technology, you'd be familiar with that, Uber. Look what Uber's done to the taxi industry, or Airbnb to the hotel industry. And so we're vigilant for technologies that might be disruptive in a harmful way, but could also be disruptive in a positive way. So I'll give you an example. One of those technologies is electric flight. We think there's a lot of promise in electric flight. It has the potential to reduce our costs by almost 100-fold, and that would allow us to do, just incredible. So that would allow us to do more ministry for less dollars. It would allow us to fly people that could never have afforded our services before, and some of the electric flight does vertical takeoff and vertical landing. So we need airstrips. We don't need big airstrips. We don't need fancy airstrips. They can just be grass strips, but we need some form of flat airstrip right now to land. If we could do vertical takeoff and vertical landing, then, we'd be able to reach even more remote locations than we can now.
So outside of airstrips, what are some other key areas where you're asking for prayer when it comes to your ministry?
Yeah, so a couple of areas that come to mind. COVID and the impacts of COVID this year. I don't know about you, but I've been on a lot of calls where people are just tired of COVID. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm whining. We are incredibly blessed, but COVID's been hard, and we have families overseas that were supposed to come home this summer that couldn't. Some of them are feeling isolated. We've had a couple of instances where families have had family members pass away and they were unable to return home, and that's tragic. So, just prayer for that. It's hard for everybody. And then just our general prayer request is for safety. We do something that's dangerous. We fly aircraft all over the world, and we fly safely, but we never want to take that for granted. And so we just constantly ask for prayer for safety.
Amen. Brad Bell, CEO of Mission Aviation Fellowship, thanks for joining me today from Guelph, Ontario.
Thank you so much for having me on the air. Bye-bye.
Canada's energy sector continues to struggle during the COVID-19 pandemic. Where are we headed when it comes to our country's oil and gas industries? Joining me now from Calgary is Cody Battershill, founder of Canada Action. It's a volunteer-led grassroots movement encouraging Canadians to take action in support of natural resources sector. Cody, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for having me again. I really appreciate the opportunity to be back with you.
Oh, absolutely, Cody. Now, with current government oil and gas policies limiting investment and exports, do we have numbers really right now as to how much this is impacting the overall Canadian economy?
What we know is that over the last several years, we have imported millions of dollars per day of oil from other countries. We know that we have lost out on billions of dollars of potential government revenues. We know that we have lost out on investment and job creation to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars. And this is a part of the anti-pipeline campaign that is uniquely targeted Canada. And now during this COVID crisis, we see that we need a strong, competitive energy industry more than ever to get our economy back on track and to support Canadian jobs for Canadian families.
Why do you think it is that Ottawa is so anti-pipeline, especially when it comes to supporting Alberta's energy sector? They'd rather bring in oil from Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's interesting because you have the Trans Mountain Pipeline that is moving forward, and that's very, very important. But when it comes to Energy East and when it comes to Northern Gateway, these are other projects that did need to get built for Canada to achieve full value for our resources, which benefits all Canadians. Additionally, with Energy East, we were going to be able to upgrade and refine more of our oil, get more Western Canadian oil to Eastern Canadian consumers, and that would have displaced other foreign oil imports coming into the country, also allowing for us to export potentially into Europe and other countries around the world. We know that there's strong demand for our oil, our natural gas, and our resources around the world. Countries want to do business with Canada, and we need to make sure that we have a competitive environment. I like to say that we should have an all-inclusive energy platform rather than a non-inclusive, because it's great to support wind and solar, but we also need to be supporting oil and gas.
So let's talk about some of those pipelines. You mentioned Trans Mountain as well, Energy East, which is dead on the table, I guess. Which ones are up and running and which ones are still facing regulatory hurdles?
Well, the important one right now that we see under construction is Trans Mountain. And Trans Mountain, they're under construction in Kamloops. That pipeline, there's a lot of misinformation that's put out by the anti-pipeline groups. So the original project has been operating since 1953. Marine shipments since 1956. There has never been a marine incident or a catastrophe. They are expanding the project now, which will get more Canadian oil into Burnaby, where we can then export that down into California or over into Asia. We are sending oil to Asia now, and it's so important that we diversify our customers as much as possible away from the United States so that we can get the best global price for our oil. Currently, just in the last couple of weeks, we have seen refiners in Spain and in India looking to buy Canadian oil. Now, the frustrating part, though, is that they're looking to buy it through the U.S. because we have not built enough of our own pipelines. So there's a good example of this missed opportunity. And going forward, as a country, we need to be talking about how we're going to solve that. The other project that is already built in Canada, but it's still awaiting some final permitting in the U.S. is the Line 3 project. That's actually just a replacement project for an existing pipeline to upgrade it to brand new modern technology. That's very important. As well, we still have Keystone XL, the saga of Keystone, under construction in some parts of Canada and the US, including the border crossing. very important for North American energy security. And we've seen over the last 10 years, as long as Keystone has been opposed, global oil demand increased by about 10 million barrels per day until pre-COVID. And the biggest benefactors of the opposition to Keystone were Venezuela, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and Ecuador, countries that obviously do not support Canadian jobs, and also countries that often have inferior environmental, social, and governance standards. So a very important part of the conversation really is who benefits when Canadian pipelines are blocked.
Cody, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has decided to lift the cap on crude oil production as of December. What does this really mean for the energy sector?
Well, it means that there's some increased confidence now in pipeline capacity and in storage in Alberta, because the curtailment was brought in to help manage the differential. If we can get Trans Mountain built, if we can get Line 3 finished, if we possibly get Keystone, plus there's some other pipeline maintenance and debottlenecking projects, if we can get increased pipeline capacity, we won't have to necessarily worry about the massive discounts again, the way that they were. I mean, at one point we were losing, $100 million a day. Selling the world's most regulated oil as a top producer with the most heavily discounted price. And there's a huge disconnect between those two statements. So this lifting of the curtailments is positive overall. We obviously want to see Alberta as as a jurisdiction for investment, for job creation, and for continued growth in our oil and natural gas industry. And this is one step in that sequence.
So how would you respond to the objections from environmentalists on the decision to lift the cap?
Well, there's just so many decisions and so many things that are being said by some of these groups. And let's be clear, all Canadians support the environment, but Canadians do not support giving opportunity and jobs that could be benefiting our families and our communities to other countries with weaker environmental standards. The groups, a lot of these groups, they say they care about the climate, they say they care about the environment, but their actions do not match up with the words. Because if those two statements were in fact what they valued, they would be supporting Canadian energy getting to the world, Canadian energy production increasing, and they would also be having a balanced, constructive conversation about how we can continue working together to improve our environmental footprint. But they would recognize we are already leading on so many regards and so many metrics. And as Canadians, we really truly should be proud of our people, our resources, and our record.
Any thoughts on the recent merger between Cenovus and Husky, the $3.8 billion stock deal? Now, we're talking about some serious job losses, around 2,000 positions, Cody.
Yeah, and it's so sad, and I just feel for everyone. I mean, we've been watching now for many years, and we need to get back to a position where Canada can compete internationally. We need to get back to a position where companies want to invest in Canada rather than leaving Canada. In this situation, I'm glad that the headquarters is staying in Canada. It's not like Cenovus could have invested in the US or they could have invested overseas, but they did buy another Canadian or merge with another Canadian company. There are some positives, but that doesn't diminish the serious impact to families. And we need a strong energy sector so that we can grow jobs and grow opportunity for our communities again in the future. And hopefully a strong Cenovus will be able to do that in the years to come.
Now, there's some good news for Calgary. Suncor announced that they're moving their Ontario Petrocan head office to the Stampede City. That should affect around 700 workers. And the company says it will ensure that they remain competitive for the long term. How so?
Well, we want our companies competitive, and so I think moving that staff into Calgary, we have a lot of great office space. We have a great quality of life, a great place to live. We're going through some economic challenges, and so bringing these positions here, it might mean potentially some local hiring if people can't move. And anytime we hear jobs coming to Calgary, that's a good thing. And we hope to get back into that trend going forward for the future, because again, we have the people, we have the knowledge, the innovation, the ingenuity, the expertise, the experience, and we should be a choice jurisdiction for investment for any energy company anywhere in the world that cares about the environment. They should be doing business in Alberta and in Canada.
Alberta definitely has the infrastructure to support our energy industry. Cody, solar and wind energy only accounted for about 4% of total U.S. consumption in 2019. The green energy lobby says fossil fuels need to be scrapped as soon as possible. But at this rate, is that anywhere near realistic?
It's not realistic. And this is not a conversation where we should be asked to choose between oil or solar, natural gas or wind. The reality is we need all of the above. And that's why we have to have this all-inclusive conversation. You cannot build a solar panel or a wind turbine without massive volumes of mined materials, oil and natural gas, and other advanced resources that have been come from the earth. And at the end of the day, we still know that right now we do not have the backup battery technology to store wind or solar energy when the sun's not shining and the wind is not blowing. So the reality is, when you look around the world right now at where some of these intermittent renewables are, they're not there yet. And it is not fair, it is not honest to be telling people that we need to make this choice today because they themselves cannot make that choice. Oil, it's been said that even in 2040, when all cars might be sold as electric vehicles, oil demand will still be around 2012 or 2013 levels because of plastics, petrochemicals, and other uses. So the fact is, oil and gas are going to be critical parts of the global energy mix for decades to come. And if we don't invest in our own production, other countries will take that market share and the environment will be worse off. And if we don't invest, period, then we will have massive, crippling shortages of energy, and we will all experience what it was like to live 75 or 150 or 200 years ago without modern energy supply and the products that we all depend on that are derived from oil and natural gas.
So with the continuing push for green energy, though, Cody, many are saying that global demand for oil is dropping off the charts. But you know what? You and I have both seen what's happening in the United States, China, India. Nothing could be further from the truth.
China's got record oil imports right now, year over year. You also have to address depletion. Every year, the world loses some of the existing oil supply that runs out. If we don't invest in recreating that supply, even when demand is flat, we are going to have an acute energy shortage. So oil demand, when Keystone XL was originally proposed, was around 90 million barrels per day. And in February of this year, pre-COVID, oil demand was right around 100 million barrels per day. It dropped down to, say, 90 million. It's back up to 95, 96 right now. And back into 2022 or 2023, all of the major forecasting agencies expect oil demand will be back above 100 million barrels per day, and it will grow for at least another decade or two, and you have to replace depletion. So where should that supply come from? And for anyone who cares about the environment, human rights, worker safety, and for any Canadian that cares about Canadian opportunity, jobs, and prosperity, I firmly believe that the world needs more Canadian energy for those reasons.
Cody, let's talk about coal for just a moment. Are you able to comment on the Grassy Mountain Coal Project in the Crow's Nest Pass? Is it possible to protect wildlife and the environment while at the same time creating hundreds of new jobs in the region?
It's absolutely possible. That's the Canadian way. And if this project goes through a rigorous, thorough environmental regulatory process, and if it's found to be in the public economic interest in a way that can balance environmental protection, then it absolutely has merit. The reality is right now, global coal use is actually still growing, and we have thousands of new coal-fired power plants around the world. Plus, you also have metallurgical coal for making steel and other products that we all use every day without even realizing how they come to be. And so if we can produce Canadian resources to our high environmental standards and get that to the world, we create jobs for Canadians, we protect the local environment while also protecting the global environment with our leading standards. And so if the project can go through that process and is found to be balanced between the two, then absolutely it could proceed.
What is the overall outlook in 2021 for our energy sector? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm optimistic because there's been such a decline around the world in oil and gas drilling, specifically oil drilling. Norway has cut back substantially. The US has cut back substantially. And so if we can get through COVID, and if demand starts to come back to where it was in the next 1 to 2 years, I think right now it looks like, and many market commentators would say that it looks like we could have a little bit of a supply shortfall. And it's a good opportunity for Canada because we have well-regulated, environmentally progressive, long life opportunities in the oil sands and in our conventional oil and gas industry with leading environmental metrics to help meet that demand. And we want to see rigs working, we want to see people employed, we want to see families successful, and also the economic opportunity. One stat that is absolutely mind-blowing: from 2000 until 2018, the women and men who work in our oil and gas industry in the oil and gas sector generated $380 billion for Canadian governments. That is an example of the foundational opportunity, the fundamental opportunity that our resource sector has been and can continue to be for our country.
You would think maybe the Trudeau Liberals would realize, hey, we're sitting on a gold mine here in Alberta. Why not tap into it, help develop those resources, and pay off some of our debt and get the deficit under control?
We need our resources firing on all cylinders. We need to support all jobs in all sectors. So support tourism, support tech, support manufacturing, but also support oil and gas and support energy in an all-inclusive manner. The fact is, oil and gas is one of the most tech-forward industries in the country. Resources account for such a huge part as well of our manufacturing base. The oil and gas industry does business with thousands of companies across Canada and is our largest export and has been the largest reason for our trade surplus over the last several years. So we are a resource nation. We are a nation of amazing people, amazing animals, amazing places like our national parks and our natural resources that we have developed using Canadian innovation, Canadian ingenuity. And we need to be champions of this opportunity we have. Other countries call it a blessing and a gift. And it's so important that we all speak up in support of a balanced, constructive conversation about why the world needs more Canadian resources.
Amen to that. Cody Battershill, founder of Canada Action, thanks for joining me today from Calgary.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.